Right, welcome back to KTN Sunrise Live. Our big discussion this morning is on that VAT Bill 2013. Initially came up last year and then was reintroduced into Parliament just this week. You know about some of the raft of measures that it has proposed. The Kenya National Commission on Human Rights has come out to say they are against it. The Jubilee government has said they will make sure that bread and wheat products are put back onto that list. Court is saying they will shoot it down. But how well do you understand this when all of this discourse is going about, even as you plan to be perhaps one of those that will go out and protest against this bill in the discussions that we're having? Do you understand the VAT bill? That's what we attempt to do today. So any questions you have with us, please do send them in to us on Twitter, because we are with Stephen Mutoro, who's the Secretary General of the Consumers Federation of Kenya. Thank you so much for making the time.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
To be with us. Yeah. Before we even get into it, let's understand the role of COFEC, okay. Because we see it during a crisis such as these. What role do you play in terms of protecting consumers' rights?
Yeah, COFEC, as the name suggests, the Consumers Federation of Kenya is the apex body that literally protects the consumers. One of the things that we did, you know, we're only 3 years old. One of the things that we did, we realized consumers can only be protected legally. So there was no legislation. And by the way, we are one of the few African countries, I think the third African country, to have a one-stop consumer legislation. Mm-hmm. His Excellency, the former President Kibaki, did assent to it on the, I think, December 13th last year. It was operationalized by the Minister for Trade sometimes in March. Mm-hmm. So we have a very young legislation, and one of the things we do under that legislation is that all sectors, you know, of the economy that offer protection, I think, are very important. But where is that particular legislation anchored? Is anchored on Article 46 of the Constitution on consumer rights. Mm-hmm. So basically, what we do is that we tell you what are your rights, and if they're violated, we give you the sort of reprieve. Okay. And there are many ways of doing that. Right. And we're proud that Kenyans are supporting us so far, because they realize that consumer protection affects everybody, right, including State House. You know, they're members of the Consumers Federation of Kenya, I would say.
All right, absolutely. We all are consumers. And you know, of course, when we talk about the rights of consumers, then I guess the big one is this VAT bill. Let's first seek to understand how it came to be that we had a certain list of items that was zero rated on tax, the history behind that and why that was done, before we take a look at how detrimental the VAT bill could be.
Yvonne, I think it would be fair to appreciate, first of all, the reason we have the VAT bill. And many Kenyans do not know. The VAT bill 2013 is on an amendment of an existing act, Cap 476, the Value Added Tax Act, that has been there for a while. But I think what is really different is that somebody has introduced some goods that were not within the bracket of taxation to be now taxable by 16%. So it means that if you're buying, for example, a packet of unga at 100 shillings, then it's going to be 116 at the minimum. Okay. Now that is where the trouble is. But the bill has a lot of very good suggestions. First of all, it wants to make it easier to collect tax by having a uniform way of collecting, because tax exemptions have also their kind of challenges. Okay. And I think if you looked at the bill, it's actually on the promises of the Cabinet Secretary in charge of Treasury. They were promising, for example, that they want to standardize the way of collecting revenue. They would also want to raise 10 billion. And I think the main problem, the elephant in the room, is about the 1.6 trillion budget. Somebody wants to raise about 10 billion. And I think that's where there are issues. So we have suggestions, but we also know that the bill has a very good side of it.
All right. And we'll get into more details regarding that. How did we come to have bread, milk, and computer accessories, sanitary towels put on this list of goods that are exempt from tax in the first place?
Yeah, there is nothing illegal in the sense of putting those particular commodities on tax. but there's everything morally and economically unviable to putting them there, especially at this particular point in time, when our economy is not supportive. You know, the history of 2007, the economy has been growing very slowly. I mean, economists have told us, and we are advised by economists, on paper, this is a very good bill, it's a very good proposal, but we are a country that operates on cartels. You know, we do not have things that are ideal. Now, on the ideal sense of it, that would be good. Somebody is talking about, for example, the chairman of Budget Committee in Parliament is saying it's good to subsidize. It's good to subsidize production, but tax consumption. That's a very good proposal. But in our country, in the third world, it's not easy to do that. And I think that's the point of the departure that we have with our friends in Parliament. And on this, we have actually been able to alert government. In fact, we should be taken to be the best friends of government, because we have raised a red flag and said there's a problem with this particular legislation. The cons will be more than the pros. If you want to use 1 trillion shillings to raise 10 billion, then I think there's something wrong with that.
All right. Let's understand some of these goods and services that were exempt from tax. Just give us some of the examples of these goods.
Yeah, I'll give them in very broad categories. First of all, food. Food. Yeah, food, I think, includes everything human beings consume.
Right.
Then you have the farm inputs. Why are they important is because they enhance production. Then there are essential commodities like, for example, sanitary towels for young girls in schools and all those kind of issues, what were classified as essential, you know. So now you have, if you introduce tax on that, you're saying people are going to pay more.
Right.
Now, the only challenge with that kind of putting all those is that it does not match with increase in revenue, per capita revenue per person. Remember, poverty levels are being enhanced. At the same time, we're now saying spend more on these basics.
Okay, all right. So let's talk about the VAT bill, and which, like you said, is an amendment. And I think it's important for us to be able to understand this process, because, you know, sometimes when we talk about it, this is all that comes to mind, and it is important, like you mentioned. It's probably more of a moral issue. But the amendment to that bill that is already existing, what were the gaps that were seen in that act that exists, that then, you know, said, okay, we need to have an amendment, which is the VAT bill 2013. What were some of those gaps that were seen in tax collection?
In our view, the bottom line, the gaps, is that VAT is supposed to be the best form of raising revenue, national revenue. But I think as of today, that is not the case. So somebody thought that there are loopholes in which exemptions are abused, and that could be true, you know. The same way somebody will also say of the subsidies that some people are proposing, because subsidies for the poor, according to various World Bank reports, do not reach to the people that they are targeted. So it's easy to say you want to give subsidy to the poor, but the question is, who is the poor in the first place?
That's right.
Now, these are some of the interesting developments. That is why I think while the intentions are very good, that you want to introduce the taxation so that you can clear the loopholes, I think it's good to look at it in a more broader way. And the broader way would be, where do we lose money most? Is it because people are not paying 16% on unga or maize flour? I don't think that is the truth. The truth is corruption at very high levels, especially when we are clearing major goods that are coming into the country. So what we are saying is that our friends are right. They need to streamline the way we raise revenue. That, there's no question about it. People are talking about tax reforms all over the world. So Kenya must reform. But in the manner that we reform, I think there's a problem. But we have specifics. I don't know at what point we'll get to that. But we have specifics where we are raising issues with the approach and with the, with the suspicious way this bill has been able to be done. And we raised a red flag about 2 weeks ago and said all is not well. And if you see the developments from State House last evening, that will tell you that is not an ordinary way State House does business. Okay, all right. Here's another interesting commodity that was introduced into the VAT bill for possible taxation, and this is computers and software. And now the question is, of course, with the laptop project that is already there, how will this affect that? Because the budget has already been set out. Let us say, hypothetically, that this bill is to sail through and we have computers, hardware and software.
How will that alter then the budget estimates that have been put in place for the laptops?
Yeah, for me, I think it's very interesting. First of all, the laptop idea is a very good idea.
Right.
The unfortunate thing is that it's seriously politicized, that to the extent that people are not making a distinction between laptops and computers.
Right.
Laptops are seen to be free, then computers are supposed to be taxed.
Right.
I think it's ironical. And I see a bit of a problem, a dilemma, particularly for His Excellency the President, because you're seeing probably your advisors at the Treasury, someone telling you, please tax computers. Then your secretary in charge of ICT say, please remove all tax on computers so that we can grow an ICT country. And I think that's the dilemma. If we are talking about concerns of this world, I think it's important to make sure that you are making access. I mean, this is a digital government, as we're told, and we have no reason to doubt there's a digital government. A digital government will not tax computers. And again, purport to bring free laptops for standard 1 pupils. Because, so there's a bit of conflict here that I think somebody needs to really sort it out.
Do you think this will take Kenya back in the steps towards, like you say, being a digital country, and in terms of having as many people access ICT services as possible?
Yeah, I think it's good to be fair, particularly on this. I think everything rests with the president. It's fair to be, it's good to be fair to the president. He means very well. But I think somewhere between the line, I think there's a bit of, the common line is missing in this process, where you have a good intention, but at the level of implementation, possibly you have no idea how you're going to implement. Because, for example, the issue of taxing computers, at the same time spending huge amounts of money, giving to people, for example, who will be thought not be priority. And I think, for me, the bottom line here is the country still in the mood of the campaign pledges, the manifestos? If I were somebody else, maybe I would actually want to eat a humble pie and say, look, I made a promise for the laptops. You're a fellow Kenyan like I, we know what we're going through. Can we delay this project, for example, for a year or two? Can we think about it? Can we also exploit the provisions of Article 10 of public participation to get views from stakeholders? Because it's one thing to make a pledge, it's one thing to look bad. But on this, I think I would be one of the people who support His Excellency the President to say, look, let's delay this for a while. Let's look for money. First of all, sort out the issue of the teachers, sort out the civil servants. Remember that the times are actually very difficult times. We are talking when students have not been in school for about 2 weeks or so. We are happy that the secondary school students may be going back today. But what about the primary school students? So again, the timing, in our view, is not right. We should not be talking about luxuries when basics like education for our children is becoming a problem.
Okay, let's stay with some of those campaign promises for a moment, and perhaps the suspicion that in order to fund some of those promises, that's where the 16% VAT is coming in. For example, the free maternal health care that has been promised, many saying that that is why we're slapping a 16% tax on some of these basic commodities to be able to get funding for some of those campaign promises. If that were to be so, would it be fair to have a 16% tax on basic essential items for another basic essential healthcare service?
Yeah, I think one of the things that need to be really looked in this country from a policy perspective is what the words free mean.
Yes.
Where I come from, the word free means you do not pay anything in return. But it appears in this country, in the public policy arena, free means cost sharing. So again, the issue of, for example, free maternal health, have seen one of the senior, I think, CEOs of a major hospital in Eldoret, coming out and saying they have a dilemma about the free maternal health. Now, to the extent that you're calling something free, then you affect the quality. You're actually punishing the poor people because they'll have to look for alternative and better quality. Remember, consumer writes about the best convergence point between quality and pricing.
Right.
Yes, we would love to have very good quality, very good pricing, but we will not want to compromise on quality.
Right.
Nobody wants to have free Medicare where you are not attended to, or you're given Panadols when you have a very severe kind of ailment.
Absolutely.
So these are some of the challenges we need to be asking ourselves. For example, how free is free primary education?
That's another one.
That's one of the things we should be asking ourselves. Then to the extent that you're now sitting somewhere planning public policy for this country on education, would you want to introduce laptops for free? I think there's again some of the questions you want to. Much as they're important, I think one of the basic things that lacking in Parliament, lacking in the executive, is actually the component of public policy. And for me, the Ministry of Planning need to start putting together some of this so that the government can think together. You do not think at cross purposes, because that is the problem with the programs in government.
Indeed. All right, let's take a look at some of those specific, perhaps alternative solutions to how to raise more revenue in the country. I mean, I think, you know, the KRA is talking about really reining in those who receive rental income and perhaps, you know, who are not being targeted. And then, Stephen, there's also the huge Juakali sector that continues to remain untaxed, but contributes so much money to our total revenue every year. What are some of those areas, do you think, that have not been looked into as a source of revenue for this country?
Yeah, first of all, if you allow for a second, one of the things that people are asking, why is COFEC opposed to the issue of VAT bill? I think that will still then answer the whatever. First of all, one of the issues that we have very strongly, and is public domain, that Article 1 of the Constitution of Kenya says that we are a sovereign state. Remember, we are bringing cases from The Hague to Nairobi. Now we seem like we want to look at our tax reforms, remove them from Nairobi to America via IMF. That is actually public knowledge. And when His Excellency the President was the Minister for Finance, he initiated this kind of discussions at the Treasury. So I know why, for example, he is very passionate about it. Now that goes against our Article 1 of the Constitution. Then Article 10 of the Constitution talks about public participation. That is missing. Recall there have been a lot of conflicting information coming from Treasury. One, Ms. Samau saying, for example, we are not going to tax food. Then a few days later, his boss, the cabinet secretary in charge of Treasury, comes and says, look, we are going to tax it. Then before we know of it, Saturday afternoon, we are called and told, look, it's on the order paper. So there have been of a problem, lack of public participation.
Right.
Now, there's some issues specifically, again, Article 35. One of the proposals in this particular bill is to put newspapers, for example, under taxation. Now, newspapers are a very important medium of people get information. Now, when you make them to get out of reach, again, you're saying that you are denying people access to information. The last bit that for us is very important is Article 43 of the Constitution. Talks about socioeconomic rights and specifically requires the government worth its salt, like our current government is worth its salt, to ensure that people are free from hunger. So now when you try and do all they're doing, you're actually making sure that people are going to be, I mean, they're going to, we are not going to be a food secure country. So, but back to your question, I think one of the things you want to look at is how do we spread our taxation? Because there's a tendency in this country that a lot of people evade tax. Now, we want to punish Yvonnes and Stevens of this country who are willing to pay. You know, we want, because we are not spreading to the people who do not pay. Now, one of the sectors that actually can be able to enhance the revenue collection is the issue of informal sector. That's one very important sector. Then we also talked about capital gains. Capital gains, that's one area that we can introduce capital gains tax. Now, but because the people, I mean, capital tax involves people who have a lot of powerful connection. That was withdrawn from this particular bill.
And
now, that's where the challenge is.
Okay, for those that may not understand, capital gains tax, if you can elaborate a little bit on that.
Yeah, this is a tax about people who make billions, people who make millions, people who make quite huge gains from their lawful business. Now that is, these people are not taxed. Yeah, they are not taxed. They're taxed like anybody else on VAT and that kind of thing. And if you tax maybe just 10%, netted what capital gains tax would be able to net, then you do not need to bother, you know, the Unga people about 16%. So, and the Unga people will also love to, you know, they would love to be taxed. But I think the question here is a moral question. Why would you not tax somebody making a lot of gains and then tax the poorest of the poor? And that's why we are telling anybody listening or watching this particular program that it's societal, particularly for politicians. We are also telling them as their friends, no one was elected in State House. They were elected by Wanjikus, and Wanjiku has spoken. They are not saying this is a political issue. It's about life and death. Anybody watching what happened in Northern Africa that led to a lot of revolution, it began like this. And we are giving people red flag that this is not an issue to politicize, it's not an issue to joke with. Let's sit around the table and discuss, because the consumers of this country would not want to entertain anything else when they are not alive, when they are not eaten so that they are alive. life.
Absolutely. So what you're saying is for the free laptops program or the free maternity health care, if you have no food in your belly, then that's probably not exactly a priority.
Yes.
Let's talk about the statement that came from State House, where the president said, you know, after talking to, you know, having the parliamentary group meeting with the Jubilee members, saying they would now introduce, you know, make sure that maize flour, that's bread, and wheat would be reintroduced into that list of goods exempt from tax. On Twitter, Kofeka said, too little, too late.
Yeah. First of all, it's good to be fair to the president. First of all, it confirms that we have a digital president.
Okay.
He's listening, he's caring,
he's watching.
he has given a response, but we are saying it's too little, too late. What we would like to do is, can we withdraw this particular, let's not commit to the second reading, this particular bill. Let's withdraw it. Let's have a lot of public consultation at all counties, and if need be, let's have a referendum, because it's a very serious issue. But we are happy the president did respond, but we are saying that is too little, too late. Then again, talking about approach, I think we have been old enough in this country. This is the first time we have seen a parliamentary group meeting at State House.
That's right.
I think even the approach that is being done, we wish to caution members of parliament in a very, very humble and fair way, that their approach was not right. They are not going to take instructions on how to vote on a matter that affects their voters. Now, this is not per se what you would call a government legislation. It's a people's legislation.
Okay.
So I think what the president has done for us is good enough. We would be happy to engage him or his officers, so that we can give further details. But as it is, I think it's a little too late.
All right. Have you been able to have any sort of engagement with members of National Assembly regarding this issue? In the papers today, being reported that CORD has said they will introduce amendments to it. If not, they will shoot it down in its current form. Have you been able to have any sort of engagement with members of either side in the National Assembly regarding this issue?
Yes, we have. And I would like to report that we have had a lot of support, you know, from members from the Jubilee side of the coalition. We are happy about the CORD. I think they are uniformly saying they are going to do this. But we're also worried. I think this should not be about protagonists in terms of the two sides of parliament. It should be about an issue about conscience. What does our conscience tell us? It's not about politics. So we are happy about all members across the divide. Of course, we have the majority from the CORD side, but we are hoping that the Jubilee side will definitely also defy, for lack of a better word, defy the instructions to support this particular legislation. Let them have collective responsibility as a government coalition on anything else, but not on matters of life and death, such as this legislation. And again, it's easy to challenge this. We do not want to see that our president assents to legislations, then the following day they're already in court. You know, that's what has happened, you know, with the Division of Revenue Bill or Act now. We don't want this particular legislation also to end there, because we are very sure that if we take it there, it's going to be made unconstitutional.
Okay, all right. Here's an interesting question that we're getting from one of our viewers regarding this issue, and I'll get to the tweet in just a moment, but it says, oh yes, here it is. It's from Hezron, who says, isn't there any other source of revenue for the government other than taxes?
No. Any government across the world, and that's why it said that give to Caesar what belongs to Caesar and to God what is his. I think any government must survive on tax. Now, the question is, which tax, to whom, when, how?
How much?
I think what Hezron is asking is, could there be a better approach so that the tax doesn't seem to be punitive? You know, when you tax people in employment 30%, for example, 30%, then you're taxing them by VAT. You're taxing them at different levels, you know. People, I mean, we become a tax country. You know, it's about, we are congested with taxation in this country. The reason we are doing that is because we do not spread the number of people that we want to get to tax. So what Hezron needs to say is, how do we bring more people? And I think the policy here should be, how do we make people proud to be taxed? You know, in this country, I think majority of us seem to pay tax for avoidance of reprisals, rather than doing that, like the KRA particular slogan that let's do this tujitegemee or something like that. I think that's what we need in this country.
Okay.
Yeah, Kenyans are willing to really support their country.
Okay, so this is understood that this is the biggest revenue. In fact, probably one of the major ways, 90% of the government's revenue. You talked about that Kenyans need to get to a point, perhaps, hopefully, where they are, proud to pay your taxes because you know where it's going. Do you think our taxes are handled the way they should be? Let's talk about KRA and how they collect the tax, how they manage the money, the revenue that is collected from our taxes.
I think your guess is as good as mine. Majority, you don't need any any research to tell you that 90% of Kenyans will tell you today they are not proud to be taxpayers. I think they feel duped, they feel cheated, they feel like they're paying tax to support people living large, people doing a lot of strange things. I think somebody was doing some research online, and we are told that some countries are actually not happy with Kenya because Kenyan foreign missions are really taking a lot of their time, where we have a lot of VIPs making what you call frequent and what we would say non-meaningful kind of trips, for example. Right. So we spend a lot in terms of not doing the right things. Basics like roads, infrastructure, that is a challenge. We have very dusty roads, they are not made up. Traffic in the city, the traffic in the city at this particular point in time is one of the most costly things. Security and all these kind of things. So bottom line, Kenyans will be very proud to support their government and their counties if they see that basically you're putting tax and you're seeing the result. But we have a case where we have sort of a bottomless kind of tax basket. And what worries us more is that KRA also has a lot of inefficiencies that it has admitted by itself, that a lot of unscrupulous officers, I mean, it's again in public domain, that very junior officers at the Kenya Revenue Authority are landlords. Now, what does that tell you? Why should you want to go and tax Wanjiku before fixing the person who's collecting that particular taxation? The bill is actually very quiet. It actually gives more powers to the commissioner to collect more taxes, but does not give it a lot of responsibility and obligation to make sure that it fights its own inefficiencies. So we are using also a lot of money to collect tax that if we reduce, again, that would add up to the tax basket.
Okay, all right. Instead, what we're saying is increase those who are under the tax net to be able to get more, as opposed to concentrating on the few, the middle class. Alex Washira asks us on Twitter, says, so how much more will they be able to raise in revenue if this goes through the way it is? And what are the other goods other than unga that are being taxed? I think a lot of people concerned when they go to the supermarket and what their shopping list now looks like, what will they be spending more on?
Yeah, I think first of all, they would like to raise 10 billion through this particular amendment. They would like to raise 10 billion. Now, the best way of raising 10 billion, first of all, I think you're talking about 1.6 trillion budget.
Yes.
But you already have a deficit of 300 billion. Now, question is, why should you have a budget where you exit expenditure and you approve expenditure, but you're not sure about revenue?
Okay.
What you do is you have to go back, whether it's a supplementary or at the appropriation level, to say we'll not be able to afford this. Now, that is the process that has not been done very well. But other than the issues to be taxed, last evening the news that unga was not going to be taxed, I think meant a lot of things to many people. There are people who do not afford bread as we speak today.
Yes.
It's a luxury.
Yes.
And you do not need to walk far.
Yep.
I mean, in the informal settlements. When you talk about unga, that's fair enough. But again, I think what the bill is talking about is all food stuffs, that are processed. Processed food will now be taxed. Anything raw will not be taxed. Okay. But the question is, if the raw was not being taxed, what then has changed? I think what is changing is somebody is saying, look, from today on, all the food that you have, whether raw or processed, apart from maize flour and bread, all of it's going to be taxed. So we'll take that statement that came yesterday, I mean, with a bit of pinches or whatever, because first of all, it was not informed by research of what people consume most.
That's right.
Yeah, there are people who consume other foods. In fact, there are places in this country that you cannot even be able to supply bread because they have no roads. And there are quite a number of them.
Right.
So if you say, for example, you're giving a relief for bread only, then what are you talking about? And this also gets us worried that probably some of the many directives, many policy statements coming from State House are not informed by research. And on this, if we have to apportion blame, we are not used to apportioning blame, but if we must, then I think these very the technocrats that came into cabinet, I think are squarely to blame for either not or misadvising His Excellency the President.
All right, okay, and as I understand it also, some commodities like toothpaste and a lot of these others that are packaged in plastics will also be affected?
Yeah, they would. You know, we're just saying generally food, everything food, beverage, you know, whatever. Is it anything, I mean, we talk about Joyce, everything else is going to be affected. And we do not want to single out anything else, save for bread and maize flour. That's what we're told as at yesterday. The Jubilee government, I think, believes that shouldn't be. But we are saying, I think, to be, again, very fair, that's fairly an embarrassing position because Kenyans do not live on bread alone. Kenyans cannot live on unga alone. There are other foods that are more important.
And if those are also going to be affected, then that definitely raises that. When you take a look at, like we talked about, you know, taxes increase, the per capita income does not. You know, what about, you know, raising the earnings for Kenyans? This is also an issue that COFEC would like to look at. What would it take to have Kenyans' earnings going up just as much as everything else is? Because it just seems like for most people, you've been earning the same thing you've been earning for the last 6 years. Prices continue to go up, taxes continue to go up.
Even as a lay economist, I will say that I think that's one of the things where we've gone wrong. Why I support the teachers' claim for more salary is because the cost of living is going up. But again, if you're going to give in for teachers, then the question is, why don't you give in to other civil servants? Why can't you give in to other people who are not employed? Now, I think the best denominator here is about the cost of living. What we need to do is to try and reduce the cost of living so that people can stop this discussion about higher salaries. I mean, you can live within your current kind of earnings, whether you're employed or in the informal sector. And I think that's again where technocrats, the policymakers, must really think. They actually must burn the midnight candle to make sure that they are able to find areas in which they can be able to reduce the cost of living. And we are advising them both for free that one of the best ways to reduce the cost of living is remove taxation on food. Even as we're speaking today, food is not affordable. So what are you talking about saying you want to tax more? Are you really, even if you walk on the red carpets every day in this country, are you really blind to see that people are not even eating? Even a meal a day is such a serious emotional issue that I sometimes get worried when I hear people recklessly, you know, at the top of the hills, issuing statements that are fairly embarrassing, fairly provocative. And I want to thank Kenyans because Kenyans have been very patient with their government. Elsewhere, I think we'll be talking another story.
Absolutely, and we're seeing things that are happening, like you mentioned, you know, even in Egypt, in North Africa, in the Middle East, and it's just pushing people to the brink. You've mentioned an interesting one of lowering the cost of living, and therefore, whatever salaries perhaps that we have, we're able to live within our means in that same salary. What are some of the other methods, do you think, that can help ease the cost of living? I know subsidies is a very controversial issue. Tell us why, you know, where we say, well, it is unfair, and perhaps to some extent I agree with this argument that it is unfair for someone in an informal settlement who makes less than 100 shillings a day to pay the same price of unga for that person that earns close to 1 million shillings a day. There just seems to be no correlation. So they've been talking about subsidies for the poor. How effective do you think this is? I know it's very controversial.
I think for me, subsidy in the context of our country is euphemism for discrimination. You know, it's easier to tell donors, IMF and the rest, that let's tax consumption, let's subsidize production. But the problem in this country is that we have skewed ways of implementation of policies. We have cartels in government, cartels at private sector, cartels even at the consumer levels. So that before you get products, and I'll give you an example of, for example, sugar. One of the sugar factories, major sugar factories in this country, sells to a supermarket a lot of sugar, now that supermarket brands the sugar as if it's the one producing. Now the supermarket also has a surplus. Instead of collecting that sugar and selling to other retailers, it sells from the same factory. And this is a government factory. Now, what does that tell you? That somebody is making huge amounts of money using the government infrastructure. Now, the problem with subsidies, as the World Bank has severally been able to study, is that they do not reach the people you target under the kind of political environment we're in. And what does that mean in few words? Is corruption. Until you and I are corruption-free, some of these issues we're talking about, they merely serve to discriminate against Wanjiku. And we are not going to get tired saying these issues, that it's good to talk about subsidies, but can anybody show us an example of where subsidies have worked in Kenya? Medical sector, education sector, you can name it. I do not see. If you give me an evidence on this, I'll be willing to shut up. But I can tell you for a fact, you can take my word to the bank, there's no way subsidies work for the poor.
All right.
In Africa.
In other countries, particularly in the West, we see for those who are, low-income earners, particularly in the US, we see them getting food stamps from the government, some sort of assistance. Let's talk about that. Are some of those, solutions applicable here?
I think the intention is very good. It could be applicable, but again, they sound more like, what you could call subsidies. Somebody came up here, I think one of the former ministers, Esther Mrugi, came up with a very good program where I think the elderly or people who miss, people
persons
who are
with
poor, that kind of
as
things.
well, yes.
Now, that fund, I think, ran into a lot of problems. And again, I see that we're in a digital government and nobody's talking about that particular fund. Right. So things start very well intentioned. But as I said, I think the devil, the trouble is simply and squarely with implementation. And the same will go for the subsidies.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Okay. What are some of the plans then that you have? Some alternative solutions to this VAT bill? We know you have a raft of them and you're saying, well, instead of going this way, you can go this way. Let's talk about some of those alternative solutions that you have.
I think the alternative solutions, they actually lie with the Mutava Musimi Budget Committee of Parliament. He has what they call a knife that is able to slice, and this goes to this and this goes to that. My own view is because we already have an issue on the issue of the Revenue Act, because we have a bit of a push and pull between the Senate and National Assembly. I think this particular Division of Revenue Bill now Act should actually be redebated at the Senate level. And one of the things we should be saying, why should we start a budget with a huge deficit, for example? Are we expecting donor support? When is it going to come in? Now, if we can first of all say that we have a budget that we can afford, I think that will be the beginning point. And what can we also do? The issue here is just austerity measures. How can we live well? Why should a minister, for example, or a cabinet secretary defy the previous policies where they're not supposed to use fuel gasolines?
That's right.
That was the headlines in the newspapers, in the media, and it went like that. We are a country that, again, has citizens. We need to ask ourselves, we are actually the problem. We have a lot of tolerance for wrong things. It should not be left to the likes of COFEC and other few institutions. No, it should be a personal responsibility. When we see things are going wrong, we should not be keeping quiet. The middle class in this country, where I think I may belong, is also to blame. Because in our comfort, we always want to try round off to the next solution. If there's no water, I would rather find money to buy a pickup and be able to transport water from point A to B. But I do not know that it will be cheaper if we can be able to make public solutions to public problems. Basically, the issue of taking responsibility. But we love hiding in the traffic, complaining. There's a lot of traffic. Today in this town, if you have an appointment with somebody, the excuse they'll always be giving you, there was a lot of traffic.
Yes.
But the question is, what are we doing about it?
That's right. Okay. So personal responsibility also on the part of citizens, whom some have taken up, and we saw the protest that happened in Parliament. Do you support the protest, and how effective do you think that will be?
First of all, since my student days, I think the second demonstration I've been involved in is the one that happened a few days ago. I really do not believe that that's one of the extreme ways.
Okay.
But apparently, we've got to a level where I think it's part of the public policy, very silent public policy, that before you shout, before you go on strike, before you go on a peaceful demonstration, before you threaten, nobody's going to listen to you. I think it's important, again, at the level of government, to listen. I mean, to be more sensitive to the cries of its people. So the protest, in our view, we had a handful of people, yes, but I want to thank the few people who turned up. I think the issue is we send a message to government. Our petition was stamped and received at Parliament and at the office of the President. That is evidence enough. For example, if we are able to have a legal intervention to show that we petitioned, things were not right, and we gave the reasons. And that's why we're happy that at least the President is acting on this.
Okay.
We do not want it to be sort of clouded in a bit of politics.
Right.
This is an issue about the lives of people. It's not a political issue.
Interesting that you mentioned that, though. People playing politics with the basic lives of people, how does this make Kofik feel when you see all of this being an issue that's politicized? Well, for many, it's just simple. I just need to eat.
Yes. I think one of the things is that we believe in the rule of law. I think most Kenyans believe in the rule of law. But there are occasions when it's so provocative that people driving in very big vehicles financed by the public, people who the other day were making life so difficult for the Salaries and Remuneration Commission, people who now have, in my view, and I want to be very polite, no shame to drive to State House and take instructions on how they're going to punish their electorate. That is too provocative. So some of these things we see, and I hope quite a number of the members of Parliament and senators are watching. There are a number of them who are actually already converted in this kind of discussion. But for those who are watching, I think this is a clarion call to them that it's important to look at this issue with the sensitivity that they deserve. First of all, again, I'd like to thank the media. The media has really given a lot of support to this. And I think media has a responsibility to this. Because you can imagine, even as a media house, if people have not eaten, I don't know who's going to wake up very early to watch KTN. There will be a challenge. So I think it affects all sectors of the economy. So on this, I think let's remove the emotions. Because if we do, I think we'll pay a very, very huge price as a country, and we'll have ourselves to blame.
Are you hopeful that this will sail through, in the right way, that these goods will now be restored in that list of those that are exempt from tax? If not, what effects, what consequences do you think it'll have on the general populace? Yeah,
for me, I think that there's no option to that. This piecemeal communication we had from the Presidential Press Service yesterday, I think for me, we should stop those kind of provocations. His Excellency the President and his deputy, they were elected on a platform of lowering the cost of living. We have a lot of clips that we can show anybody who's willing that the two gentlemen, who we have reason to believe they were in their sound mind at that particular time, as they are today, they have no option other than to withdraw this particular legislation or remove completely, because there are sections that we're saying they're good. Remove anything touching on food. If they do not do so, has somebody else said elsewhere, choices have consequences. But on this one, I think the consequences will be almost instantaneous.
Okay.
Yeah, that is, and it's not a threat to anybody. I think it's a question, if they're reading the mood of this country right, this is not an issue that they want to do that. So for us, there's no option. Is either you remove the whole exemption on food, or you don't pass this particular bill. Or you pass it, we have various options. We'll seek for legal interpretation. And we're hoping Kenyans will not go to the extreme that we are worried about.
Yes. Do you think, though, that many people say that, this is Kenya, and we see certain things happening, and If, let's say, the law is passed in its current form, even though they've said that maize flour and bread will be put back on that list, that Kenyans may just have a tendency to accept and move on. Do you think that's a possibility, that we'll just say, okay, well, looks like, I'll have to get an extra job and I'll just have to make sure I can earn more money just so that I can get a meal on the table? Do you think there's also that danger?
I don't think. Reading the public mood as I do, and in fact, organizations like ourselves, we have a major burden on this. We're almost equating ourselves to the guy in Tunisia, the hawker, who set himself ablaze because the city council of that particular of the world was really harassing. So we do not want to get to those extremes, but yes, they are doable. Now on this, we're also happy that we are seeing government agencies like the Kenya National Commission on Human Rights actually echoing our kind of sentiment. A lot of members of parliament, a lot of diplomats, I think, so we are going to pile pressure and we're promising them. But I think the easy solution is for the two gentlemen, top gentlemen in this country, the CEO and deputy CEO of the country called Kenya, to actually reverse or go slow on this particular legislation. That would be the easiest way, so that there could be a lot of consultation. Anything contrary to that, as we say, even if you pass that legislation, on what basis? And anybody, particularly the members of parliament, it's suicidal, They have a contract with the people. They do not have a contract with State House. State House may not be using unga every day. But their ordinary electorate, they need it. So I think this is one of the messages that we're telling them. It's important to look at it. The bill, or the alternative, can we split the bill into two and look at the issues, the policies, then remove the issue of exemption that can be discussed over time.
Over time. And do you believe that the heat that's being pushed on the government, obviously we're seeing it starting to bear some fruit with the statement from the PPS yesterday evening, but do you think now the heat, it's now not just COFEC anymore, it's not just protests in the streets, the Kenya National Commission on Human Rights, the diplomats, you believe this will all end well for the Kenyan public?
For me, I think when we were raising the spark as COFEC, I think our role almost ended there. I think Kenyans have taken the lead. If you saw the Catholic bishops, and we urge them on Sunday, this Sunday, particularly through Cardinal Njue, so that they can pass a message across the country, all the priests, so that Kenyans can be rallied. And whether with Muslims, Hindus, everybody, let's have what you call an nonviolent revolution against what we are calling an evil legislation. An evil because it portends evil for this country if it is passed in the form that it is. Then we're also asking Treasury to open its doors. When we went to send a petition, I think a day or so ago, we realized that we were locked out. Now, again, we would urge Mr. Rotich, the Cabinet Secretary in charge of Finance, that I think is important to open doors for dialogue. We know he could be a slave of this process. He is a very new minister, but it's important for him to open up discussion, because his office, and particularly the chairman of Finance Committee in Parliament, Mr. Benjamin Langad, has also a responsibility to advise State House, and I think together they can be able to look at this issue. It actually goes beyond them. Because if this country turned into chaos, that particular legislation, I don't know what value would it be. Those of us who were in this country in 2007, 2008, we know what we're talking about. So it's important that we don't even think about those kind of issues.
Yes, in as much as you're saying that is not a threat, and we're hoping that it won't come to that, but it really could, couldn't it?
Yeah, it could. Actually, it's boiling. I can tell you it's boiling. It's boiling because we have a lot of information, people sending us, and some of the information we will have to volunteer to the NSIS. Because we are a law-abiding organization, people are concerned, people are saying, let Parliament pass the bill, let the President assent to that particular bill, and then they'll see. Now, what they'll see is what we do not know, but we do not want to get there. We are saying we can correct that problem because we love our country, we want to reclaim it back, we want to grow our economy, we also want to assure foreign direct investors, because now the problem again, this legislation is going to kill the foreign direct investment. Now, what does that mean is our problems will be compounded. Now, if you kill production that they were saying they want to subsidize, because they are looking at production at a local level. Again, in a more, what I'll call, in a more artificial kind of way, because the best production you look for is you look for mega investments. But who would want, between say Uganda and Tanzania and Rwanda, particularly Rwanda, if somebody looking at Rwanda and Kenya and is in the United States or the UK, where would he like to invest? Obviously, go to Rwanda because the cost of living, the cost of production is fairly low. So we're actually doing this for the industry. But merely saying that you want to pass this bill so that tax refunds will be easy, you're saying the production side will be happy. If the consumers are not happy, obviously, the producers will not be happy.
Okay, and that indeed is the bottom line. We leave it at that for now. We thank you so much for making the time to come in with us. Stephen Motoro, who's the Secretary General of COFE Kenya, that's the Consumer Federation of Kenya. By the way, that Twitter handle is at Consumers Kenya. So in case you want to get in touch with them or for further information, we thank him for giving us the bottom line of the VAT bill and proposing some solutions. So we're not just shooting it down on the show today, but saying these are some of the areas that Kenyans are unhappy with, and this is what can be done in terms of making that bill. We've talked about the good and also about the bad. We hope now you have a better understanding and perhaps, wanting to do something more regarding this bill. Let's wait and see what more will come out of State House regarding this issue. We will be reading some of your feedback regarding the issue later on in our show. We have about half an hour to go now. We want to take a short break. We'll be right back with lots more of your feedback and some news as well.